In Milan, 1485, the faint light of dawn barely pierced through the fogged windows of a small room, mixing with the subtle, persistent scent of vinegar and herbs, which the city used to ward off an invisible enemy. Leonardo da Vinci, whose name was already renowned throughout Italy as that of its greatest artist and thinker, was not asleep. His morning had begun long before most citizens awoke, assuming they even dared to leave their homes. He sat at a table, bent over an unrolled parchment, his ink-stained fingers moving with astonishing precision, sketching rough but mathematically precise designs for pipes, canals, and ventilation shafts. This work seemed a world away from the sublime art that had made him famous. There were no brushes, no canvases, no enigmatic smiles here, only dry, practical engineering demanding cold calculation and meticulous attention to detail. The scratch of his pen on parchment was the only sound in the room, broken only by his own breathing. He frowned in concentration, envisioning water flows, air movements, and how to make a plague-stricken city breathe and purify itself. In this seemingly mundane work, he saw not merely a solution to practical problems, but salvation from the chaos that threatened to consume everything. Leonardo, a universal genius whose ideas were centuries ahead of his time and whose paintings could stop hearts, was now engrossed in a task that would seem mundane to a simple craftsman. But for him, this was a battlefield where reason served as his only weapon, and the survival of an entire city was at stake. This day, like so many others, would be filled with his deep reflections, his relentless search for order in the world, and his struggle against the limitations of both body and era. We will follow him through this day to witness how a man whose fame has long become legendary truly lives, and how, through his daily actions, the very spirit of the Renaissance reveals itself. Leonardo da Vinci was in Milan, a city that had become both his home and his laboratory for many years. Since 1482, he had served at the court of Ludovico Sforza, a duke known for his love of luxury and, even more importantly for Leonardo, for new ideas. During those years, Leonardo's reputation was dual. To most, he remained an outstanding artist, whose works, such as the Madonna of the Rocks or the recently begun Last Supper, already commanded admiration. However, Leonardo himself saw himself first and foremost as an engineer, a scientist, a man driven to understand and reshape the world. His workshop, located not far from Sforza Castle, was a veritable chaos of genius. Here, anatomical drawings of the human body, made after secret dissections, lay alongside blueprints for flying machines and war machines. Stacks of parchment with notes on the movement of water, plant growth, and the mechanics of motion filled every corner. In this creative disorder, Leonardo sought answers, striving to apply science to solve the most pressing problems. But now, a real threat hung over Milan. Just a few years prior, a wave of plague had swept through the city, claiming the lives of a third of its population. Memories of thousands of dead bodies, of panic and despair were still vivid. The view from his window confirmed this. Empty streets, shrouded in morning mist, with only occasional masked figures moving through them. Smoke from bonfires where disinfectant herbs were burned rose above the rooftops, creating an ominous veil. Leonardo understood that a new outbreak of the disease was only a matter of time. He felt that his engineering projects, his ideal city with its well-designed drainage and ventilation systems, might be the only salvation. This day was particularly important. Today, Leonardo was to present his initial ideas to Duke Sforza. The stakes were incredibly high. If successful, his project could save Milan from a new disaster, preventing the deaths of thousands, and solidifying his reputation, not just as an artist, but as a great engineer. However, failure could cost him everything. The Duke might dismiss his ideas as mad fantasies, withdraw his patronage, and leave the city defenseless against the disease. This could forever alter his standing and the fate of Milan, leaving his name in history not as a savior, but as a dreamer, whose ideas proved useless in the face of death. For Leonardo da Vinci, awakening was never simply about rest. It was a transition from one state of consciousness to another. He slept on a hard, straw-filled mattress in his small room. Cold air often seeped through the cracks, making him feel the morning chill. Even after his short, polyphasic sleep, he often felt tired. Yet his mind was always ready for work, driven by an insatiable thirst for activity. His morning rituals were simple, almost ascetic. He would rise, stretch, and make his way to a clay mug of cold water sitting on a small wooden table. A splash of cold water helped clear the last vestiges of sleep and sharpen his mind. Next, he would scrutinize yesterday's drawings spread across the table, his fingers tracing the lines as if searching for hidden errors or new opportunities. The dim candlelight illuminated his tired yet sharp and focused face, reflected in a small mirror. Leonardo's breakfast was equally modest: a piece of stale bread and a few dried fruits. He was a staunch vegetarian, holding the belief that man should not be a tomb for other creatures. As he ate, his mind was already consumed by the day ahead, the complexities of his ideal city project, and the immense pressure he was under. He pondered how to convince the Duke of the necessity of such radical changes, and how to convey his vision of order and harmony in a world still dominated by chaos and death. This internal dialogue about the necessity of order amidst chaos, a theme reflected in his strict, almost ascetic morning rituals, helped him maintain focus in the face of impending threats. Leonardo had barely finished his modest breakfast when a knock came at his door. It was his servant, a young man named Giacomo, whom Leonardo nicknamed Salai, meaning little devil, because of his restless nature. Giacomo stood in the doorway, his pale face contorted with fear, and his trembling hands clutched a small parchment. The smell of incense hung in the air, drifting in from the street, mingling with the scent of fear that seemed to emanate from the servant himself. Giacomo handed over the note, his voice barely a whisper as he spoke of a new, particularly severe plague outbreak in one of the city's densely populated districts. The news hit Leonardo with renewed force, intensifying the pressure and his anxiety. His gaze, filled with both alarm and determination, drifted into the distance as he clutched the parchment bearing the news. He knew every minute of delay could cost dozens, even hundreds of lives. His ideal city, his plan to save Milan, had to be adopted immediately. The day's main task had become even more urgent. Leonardo was scheduled to present his first sketches of the ideal city to Duke Sforza, needing to convince him of the project's viability and extreme urgency. This wasn't just a presentation of engineering solutions, it was a race against death, with the lives of thousands hanging in the balance. The unexpected news of the plague now jeopardized his entire plan and intensified his personal responsibility, transforming what was once a scientific endeavor into a desperate race against time and death. Leonardo donned his heavy, road dust-covered cloak and stepped out of his workshop. His route to Sforza Castle took him through Milan's deserted but still perilous streets. The city, typically bustling and vibrant, now felt like a ghost town. The distant tolling of bells mingled with the stench of decaying refuse and the sharp scent of disinfecting herbs, creating a haunting atmosphere. He saw the plague's marks everywhere: closed houses with crosses painted on their doors, and rare, silent funeral processions carrying bodies wrapped in shrouds. Fear was etched on the pale faces of the few passers-by who, noticing him, quickly looked away or hurried their pace. Leonardo felt the weight of this atmosphere pressing down on him, but he kept walking, his thoughts focused on the upcoming meeting. Halfway through his journey, on one of the narrow streets, his gaze fell upon a hunched figure. A beggar, dying from the plague, sat by the roadside, his body trembling with fever. As Leonardo passed by, the man lifted his head, and his eyes, filled with despair, met the artist's. The beggar's emaciated hand slowly reached out to Leonardo, pleading for help. This moment, this encounter with a dying beggar, highlighted the brutality of the era and Leonardo's personal helplessness in the face of the disease, despite his genius and his pursuit of order. He realized that his ideas, his designs, seemed so distant from this real, tangible pain, and this thought burned within him. Sforza Castle welcomed Leonardo with the coolness of its stone walls and the scent of wax and aged wood. Inside a luxurious hall adorned with heavy tapestries, Duke Ludovico Sforza and his advisors were already assembled. The Duke's cold, appraising gaze and the wary faces of his advisors underscored the seriousness of the moment. Leonardo unrolled his parchments, revealing meticulously drawn designs for a multi-level city. These plans included an intricate canal system, efficient ventilation, and rigorous hygiene standards. He began to speak of order and harmony, of how clean water and fresh air could save the city from disease. His voice sounded confident, but inwardly he felt profound weariness and doubt. He felt the weight of his cloak, the stuffiness of the room, which seemed to intensify his physical exhaustion. Thoughts of the beggar on the street, of his outstretched hand, gave him no peace. As he pointed to the complex drainage system, his hand trembled almost imperceptibly. This subtle tremor betrayed his inner tension and the stark contrast between his official role as a genius and the living man, full of anxiety. Leonardo's trembling hand, betraying his inner tension and exhaustion, was a stark contrast to his outward confidence and official role. It revealed the living man behind the genius's mask. He understood that every word, every gesture he made, now held immense significance. Yet his body, worn out by polyphasic sleep and gnawing anxiety, barely responded. Leonardo's presentation was interrupted. One of Duke Sforza's advisors, an elderly, arrogant man, spoke skeptically about the project. He dismissed it as an artist's fantasy, deeming it too expensive and completely unrealistic to implement. His mocking, dismissive gaze swept over the blueprints as if they were useless scribbles. The Duke hesitated. His gaze grew thoughtful, and his fingers began to nervously tap on the table, a clear sign of deep uncertainty. Leonardo feels a surge of anger and frustration. His fists clench beneath his cloak as thoughts of his vision of order clashing with a rigid, short-sighted pragmatism burn him from within. He realizes his plan is in jeopardy. They suggest simplifying the project, making it more down-to-earth. But this goes against his vision of the ideal order he had so meticulously crafted. He believes that compromising this vision would be a betrayal. This complication takes a toll on him not just mentally, but physically. He's deprived of rest and concentration, his fatigue deepens, and the familiar comfort of solitude is no longer available. He begins to feel that his previous plan is no longer working, and his familiar daily routine is crumbling. The advisor's skepticism and the Duke's hesitation call the entire project into question, forcing Leonardo to choose between compromise and defending his ideal, risking everything. Leonardo turned abruptly and exited the hall, leaving behind the advisor's mocking gaze and the thoughtful tapping of the Duke's fingers. He sought solitude, and his feet instinctively carried him to one of the towers of Sforza Castle. The stone walls of the tower were cold, and a piercing wind blew through the arrow slits, making him pull his cloak tighter. He gazed at the city veiled in the evening mist. Behind every window, sickness could be lurking. Every day, people were dying. His hands gripped the cold railing as he pondered his mission. What truly mattered more to him? The Duke's approval or the truth? Saving lives or preserving his own vision? He remembered his mother, a peasant woman. Her image, taken from him too early, remained etched in his memory forever. It dawned on him that his drive for order, for creating an ideal city, wasn't solely about science or engineering calculations. It was also a deeply personal desire to shield the world from chaos and suffering, like the agony he'd witnessed on the face of a dying beggar. His gaze, fixed on the distant horizon where the setting sun painted the sky in unsettling hues, was filled with resolve. He knew there was no turning back. He resolved not to abandon his ideal even if it meant losing the Duke's support. For him, his vision was his way of fighting the world's chaos, and he was ready to pay any price for it. Returning to his workshop, Leonardo found the familiar gloom, lit only by a single candle. His servants, occupied with their duties, avoided his gaze, sensing the tension and the uncertain outcome of his meeting with the Duke. He understood that his position, his authority, and his entire project, all of it now hung by a thread. He sat down at the table, where a modest dinner awaited him on a plate. But the food seemed tasteless, his mind consumed by thoughts of the project. He reviewed the blueprints scattered across the table, lightly covered in dust, searching for new arguments, new ways to convince Sforza. Physical exhaustion was taking its toll. His tired eyes, reflected in a small mirror, betrayed deep weariness, yet his mind continued to race, finding no rest. The scent of old parchment and wax mingled with a faint aroma of disinfectant, a reminder of the plague that still lingered in the city. Leonardo sensed this day hadn't brought a definitive resolution. Instead, it only intensified his loneliness and his fight for his vision. The shifts were just beginning, yet he felt them in every detail. They were in the servants' averted gazes, in the bland food, and in the relentless churning of his own mind. He was left alone with his unresolved problems and a mounting sense of anxiety. Leonardo couldn't sleep. The darkness of the room, with only the flickering candlelight casting strange shadows on the walls, offered no peace. He was tormented by thoughts of the plague, of the city, and of his project, which had met with resistance that very day. He understood that this day was only the beginning of a long struggle, a fight for order amidst chaos, for the future of Milan, and for the very idea that reason could triumph over disease and ignorance. The consequences of today's meeting with Duke Ludovico Sforza felt like a heavy weight on his chest. His ideals had clashed with pragmatism and the fear of change, and this collision resonated as pain in every joint, in every muscle of his weary body. He rose, walked to his desk, and picked up his journal. The scratch of his pen on paper broke the silence as he began to write. As always, he used his mirror script, recording new ideas and observations that went beyond the day's events. His focused face, reflecting both weariness and an unyielding thirst for knowledge, was fixed on the invisible future. He recorded not only the day's events, but also new thoughts about the flow of water, the purity of air, and the structure of the human body. All that he believed would one day change the world. This day, full of doubt and disappointment, was just another step in his relentless search for truth. He thought that his ideas might not be understood now, but they would surely be realized in the future, saving lives and creating new cities. The last entry in the diary, another line written from right to left, symbolized his unyielding faith in the power of reason and order, leaving a sense of incompleteness, but also an anticipation of future, monumental discoveries that would one day transform the world as we know it.